Thank you. I just have a couple of questions that I've been asked to ask you. First of all, Professor Foster, in your evidence, you said that you never had records from the interferon era. Can you help us at all with why that was?
Sorry, so interferon treatment was administered locally by individual hospitals. There was no central registry of treatments administered. And we go back to the problem we have with notes that are missing, old handwritten notes going back to the 1990s. So unfortunately, we don't have a central registry.
A number of you described using the record of a blood transfusion within the relevant period as a risk factor for hepatitis C, and 1991 being the end stop for that. I'm asked to ask that after the inquiry report is published, will any findings that may be made relating to the end stop date be taken into account when publishing anything about the hepatitis C relevant period?
I'm sure if there was a different conclusion reached, we'd want to act on it and want to respond appropriately.
And is that the situation across the nation?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, Professor Foster, it's a question for you, dealing with the use of blood samples that have been taken for other reasons being tested for hepatitis C. Can you tell us what the position is in relation to consent for testing?
We are currently working through that process with the local teams in Liverpool who are doing it as a research project. There is an issue as to whether it will be anonymised or whether patients will be pre-consented, but nothing will take place outside the jurisdiction of an appropriately constituted ethical review board.
And finally, you all talked about the utility of online portals for patients to access testing. What arrangements are being made or would anticipate being made to ensure that those with less access to the internet can still access that information? Perhaps if we start with what is being considered, and then others if you have a view of what might be considered.
We see the web portal as giving us insights into populations that we're missing, and we would hope and anticipate that there will be a fairly broad spectrum of people who will access it. I think the idea that the elderly don't use the internet is very much a myth, but that will identify populations at risk who can then be selectively targeted. So if, for example, we find a cohort of over 80s have unexpected hepatitis C, we would then start to think about ways we could implement. So we'll use it as the learning. It's another plank in our evidence base to what else we need to do rather than a final gain point.
Do any of you want to add to that?
I think there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and so I think having lots of options and so people can choose according to their abilities and their preferences.
Yeah, similar response. It would be additional to other mechanisms for being tested, and if we became aware of a particular group that needed testing in a particular way, we would be very open to developing whatever is required in that regard, as evidenced by how we're expanding testing in so many different ways.
Dr. McLean, is there anything you would like to add?
Similarly, we would want to make it accessible for all populations.
So those are the questions I've been asked to ask. I don't think there are any further. Is there anything you would like to raise?
I have no additional questions of my own.
Professor Foster, is there anything else you would like to add before we finish?
No, I think we've covered things very clearly. Thank you.
Professor Dillon?
I have nothing to add.
Dr. Healy?
The only thing I'd add is that I think you asked me earlier about looking back, and I was talking about in the recent past. I didn't allude to the earlier look back in 1995, but I took that as granted, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Dr. McLean, is there anything else you would like to add?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Well, can I, for my part, thank each of you. I know that this is, in some respects, an imposition upon busy practitioners, particularly after what you've said about the stresses on the system following COVID and the backlog that there may be after that. So it is particularly valuable to have you here, and what you have told us, particularly given the approaches in England and Scotland, has been most informative and instructive and very helpful. So thank you.
So we obviously just need a short break to allow the panel to go and our next witness to attend. I know that's a little bit awkward having just had the lunch break, but perhaps we can just have 10 minutes.
Yes, so not before 2:15.